Hello everyone, this is Katie Mercier from the Coalition for Juvenile Justice. We're just going to give everyone just about a minute to filter in and sign on, so we'll be starting in just a minute. Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Like I said, my name is Katie Mercier. I'm from the Coalition for Juvenile Justice, and welcome to this webinar. Today, CJJ is pleased to welcome Bob Schwartz of the Juvenile Law Center and the John D. and Catherine M. MacArthur Foundation's Models for Change community to talk about how to leverage public-private partnerships to reform juvenile justice policy and practice. This topic is particularly timely and relevant in this tough fiscal climate when public dollars and other public resources are simply insufficient to do all the work that needs to be done to being about positive outcomes for youth and families. As many of you know, Models for Change supports a network of government and court officials, legal advocates, educators, community leaders, and families working together to ensure that kids who make mistakes are held accountable and treated fairly throughout the juvenile justice process. The Juvenile Law Center is part of the Models for Change National Resource Bank, a group of 16 leading national juvenile justice research, reform, and advocacy organizations that provide expert advice, training, and technical assistance to the core states and action network sites. The Juvenile Law Center has also been the lead entity for the Pennsylvania Models for Change initiative since 2004. Before I turn it over to Bob, I just wanted to give a few technical instructions. First of all, you're all muted throughout the presentations, all the participants. So if you have a question, you can click raise your hand. We'll take questions at the end. If you're having any technical difficulties or have questions throughout the webinar that you want to be addressed at the end, you can also enter them in the questions box. And with that, I am turning it over to Bob Schwartz.
Thank you, Katie, and thanks to you and Marie Williams and the Coalition for Juvenile Justice, as well as the MacArthur Foundation for making this possible. And thanks to Autumn Dickman, who has been leading the Pennsylvania effort with me and others here at Juvenile Law Center for the last 7 or 8 years, for helping to pull this together. So the themes of this webinar emerged from a monograph that we wrote on the Pennsylvania MacArthur collaboration on Models for Change. It's called Pennsylvania and MacArthur's Models for Change, the Story of a Successful Partnership, which is available on our website. We wrote it because one of the models in Models for Change was the collaboration itself between the MacArthur Foundation and the Pennsylvania State Advisory Group, which distributes federal juvenile justice dollars in the state. The details of that collaboration are in the monograph. Today I'll be focusing on the why, the what, and the how of the collaboration. The Pennsylvania MacArthur collaboration is not replicable in its entirety. The scale is too big, and the decline of federal funds makes it harder for SAGs to replicate what the SAG in Pennsylvania did. Nevertheless, there are lessons that are instructive for smaller undertakings, and those are the lessons that we want to talk about today. They apply to a range of private funders. There are big national foundations, but most of your partnerships, as well as mine, won't be with them. It'll be with regional foundations, such as those that serve the Midwest or the Southeast or other parts of the country. They'll be with community foundations that serve counties or cities. There'll be corporate foundations that tend to make grants in communities in which they have operations. And just as foundations differ, so do state advisory groups in their structure and function. And while this is a story about state advisory groups, many of you on the line, and many of you are on the line from those groups, the lessons should also apply to any public entity seeking to gain public-private partners. So next, if you would, Katie, please. So these are our goals for the next 50 minutes or so. How can the state advisory groups or other public entities leverage limited dollars by gaining a private funding partner? My goal here is to describe areas in which MacArthur and Pennsylvania's SAG collaborated to trigger ideas that will work for you in your county or state. And the expectation is that you on the line will be able to find at least one area that might work in your jurisdiction. But we're going to begin with a poll. Next, please. So, Katie, do you want to provide any instructions on this? Oh, here we go. There are two questions coming up, and we'd ask you to answer them.
So here's the first poll question. I'll leave it open for about a minute or so, and then I'll switch to the next question if you want to just select yours.
Yeah, this is probably simple enough that we could probably do it in 30 seconds, I would think, given the caliber of people on the call. And then we'll go to the next one.
There you have the results from the first question on your screen.
If you could go to the second question, please. Okay, Katie. All right, let's move on to the next slide, please. What we wanted to do, in order to give you a little bit of background on some of the collaborations, is to give you a brief overview of the structure of the partnership here in Pennsylvania, to understand the context of the way the State Advisory Group and MacArthur collaborated. The SAG in Pennsylvania is known as the Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention Committee, which is a committee of the Pennsylvania Commission on Crime and Delinquency. One of its virtues is that, at least over the 20-plus years that I was on the SAG, governors of both parties made sure that there was leadership on the SAG from each branch of government, from counties as well as from the state, and from professional associations like the Probation Officers Council. They made sure that defense and prosecution and service providers were represented on the SAG. It was a very experienced group that had figured out how to work together and trusted each other because of a very long-standing relationship. Strong leadership is always important, especially if you're trying to bring private partners on board. For our purposes today is that bringing on private partners for which it really does have added value. A foundation will be making grants in part because of its sense of the state advisory group's judgment. For example, if I was running an in-home service and applying directly to a foundation, the foundation would examine my track record or the organization's track record, my board of directors, my financial history, my record of success. The foundation might give me a little more leeway if the state advisory group says that I'm worthy of funding or has already invested in me and given its seal of approval. To do that, the foundation has to trust the state advisory group's track record. Strong leadership helps. In Pennsylvania, this trust came from ongoing foundation saggings and from other factors, such as the foundation's recognition that the advisory group every 2 years submitted a comprehensive report to the governor that laid out a vision for the future of juvenile justice in the state. So that suggested there was an opportunity for common visions. So it was also important, if you imagine a large-scale collaboration, that in Pennsylvania, the state advisory group, as we'll see in a few minutes, had control of lots of federal and state funding streams that were tied to executive branch agencies. These included JJDPA funds, Justice Assistance Grant funds, but also a bunch of other and smaller funding streams. All right, Katie, next, please. Okay. In this case, in Pennsylvania, it was the foundation that was looking for strategic partners. I think one of the themes today is that the SAG can look for strategic partners with the foundation. Here it turned out to be quite a good match, in part because the state advisory group had already focused on 3 areas that were of interest to the foundation. Those 3 areas were aftercare, mental health, and disproportionate minority contact. Next, please. Okay. So, as you on the SAG or in government or in a nonprofit that is looking to get foundation support, think about your approach. We think it's important to create a menu of possibilities. And we're using aftercare as an example here from the work in Pennsylvania. Here we developed a fairly comprehensive vision that you'll see in a minute that had 17 goals as subparts. Those goals included things like keeping the child welfare system open for kids who are leaving juvenile justice, providing continuity of mental health services for youth who are leaving placement. They included making sure that public defenders continued representation while their clients were still in placement or under state supervision, and ensuring that confined youth had opportunities to return to school or get jobs when they left placement. Every one of those ideas could be framed and marketed in different ways to get the attention of a foundation or corporate partner. So each of those 17 could in turn be broken down into its own menu of opportunities. Having said that, I'm reminded of something actually that happened decades ago when a high school friend came to see me, and it turned out that he was a wholesale sweater salesman, and in our building at the time was a children's apparel place. And he described what he did as a sweater salesman, going to department store after department store trying to sell sweaters. And I realized we were in the same business, that we were in marketing. And then I was going to foundations saying, if you're at all close to the sweater business, I can give you V-neck. We could do this in cotton. We could do wool. You want really good wool? Well, we have the cashmere for you. That's what we're doing as we create our menu of opportunities for foundations to support. They're our buyers, in a sense, as well as our partners in the enterprise. And it's much easier to find these partners if you can frame the SAG's goal in a way that aligns with the private funder's stated interest. So the bottom right of this screen suggests a way to think about that with respect to aftercare. So imagine that you're working on improving correctional education. You might want to turn to a foundation that is interested in improving juvenile justice, or that has announced its interest in second chances or reentry. But you're likely to find many more foundations that are interested in education funding, or access to higher ed, or reducing dropout rates, truancy reduction. There are ways to reframe correctional ed in a way that is much more likely to get you broader support from a local foundation. Conditions of confinement might be reframed for the funder who's interested in human rights, where education is a part of the conditions of a facility. So that you have those that are interested in youth employment, jobs, employability, connecting kids with mentors in the employment world. That's another opportunity, including linking with perhaps your local workforce investment board to make that happen. It's easier to start small and develop pilot partnerships around these issues and see where they head. It's an opportunity to nurture as you explore different ways to reframe your menu of opportunity. So the next one, please, Katie, as we go to another couple of examples on aftercare in Pennsylvania. First, just a reminder of what I just said. We developed a vision statement in this joint policy statement on aftercare that was signed by the Secretary of Education, by the Secretary of Public Welfare, by the head of the Juvenile Court Judges Commission, the head of the Council of Chief Juvenile Probation Officers, and by the head of the umbrella organization for our state advisory group. So we had a lot of state leaders that bought into the vision, which made a statement to the MacArthur Foundation. This joint policy statement, as I said, also provided a menu of opportunities, not only on what to support, but provided in its way arrows towards who to support. So the vision offered lots of generic opportunities. It was broad and compelling. And then the breakdown of the opportunities under that gave the foundation a chance to pick and choose not only the what, but the who it would support in terms of implementing the vision. So let's just take a look at the next slide and see how that played out. First, the foundation saw that the vision had the governor's backing. It saw who signed off on the vision statement, the policy statement, and it also was very clear that it had the JJDPC fully engaged. Then the SAG and MacArthur shared or took primary responsibility for funding to advance the goals of the policy statement. So the grants that both made, that the SAG made and MacArthur made, reflect a theory of change. In the case of Models for Change, we wanted this theory, this work, to be wide and to be deep. This meant engaging folks at the county level for a bottom-up strategy, but it also meant identifying those governmental and quasi-governmental entities that were necessary for the reform to succeed. And those entities existed at both the state and the county levels. And it also meant funding an advocacy element to keep pressure on the system at the county and state levels to increase the chances of success. So grants were made, as you can see on this chart, by the foundation and by the state advisory group to fund 5 model counties on aftercare. 4 of those were funded, as you'll see in the chart that we'll get to in a second, not quite yet. Let's work back if you can. Sorry, I gave a heads up too soon. By the State Advisory Group. MacArthur also chipped in. The interesting thing about what the SAG did here was that it put out a request for proposals that went to every county in Pennsylvania, signaling the partnership and also signaling the SAG's interest in aftercare. And it also referenced the joint policy statement and had a requirement in the RFP that counties that got awards would have to participate in Models for Change, cooperate with the foundation, and more importantly, cooperate with the National Center for Juvenile Justice, which got a grant, as you can see below, from both the SAG and MacArthur in its effort to orchestrate the reform effort in the model counties. We also took a look at where might we need real advocates and leadership at the state level, and both the SAG and MacArthur then made grants at the state level to get juvenile court judges leadership, to get probation leadership, because probation is really important for this effort in Pennsylvania, because they do the aftercare work and do the case planning. The Department of Public Welfare runs and licenses and funds residential programs in the state. And then they MacArthur funded Education Law Center to provide training to probation officers around education law, to turn probation officers into education advocates for kids returning to school, and both provided funding to the Defender Association for reasons you'll see in a second. And we can now go to the next slide. And as I'm saying that, we don't expect a SAG in today's climate to do all of this, but each of these listed provides an example of how a SAG might gain leverage for an aspect of its work. Whatever aspect of work you pick should be tied to a logic model that makes sense to the people who aren't specialists, like those at foundations who are trusting the people in the field to be the specialists in the work. And as you'll see as we move to this slide, the SAG had access to numerous funding streams that were listed in that third column from the left, each of which had a different kind of flexibility and duration. And it was that flexibility and duration that was also appealing to the foundation, since this initiative then wouldn't be tied to one-year budget cycles that limit most state funding efforts. So let me just point out a few things on this chart that I hope you all can see, or have a computer screen large enough to grab it. This is just the aftercare collaboration of MacArthur and the SAG over a 6-year period. They didn't all happen at once. These were folded in over time, beginning with the pilot counties and the judges' leadership and the involvement of the chief probation officers. But by the middle of the enterprise, there was a clear need for the growth of better public defender service. So in Pennsylvania, under the leadership of Bob Listenby, who is now at JJDPC, ironically, for purposes of this discussion, but was then the chief of the juvenile unit in Philadelphia, funding supported the Defender Association, not only to help train defenders to stay involved with their clients after disposition, but also to create the Juvenile Defenders Association of Pennsylvania, JDAP, which still exists and is part of the effort for change now in the state. The issue of diversion came in a little bit late, and we'll be getting a little bit more in that, but MacArthur funded development of a diversion guidebook, and then the SAG funded pilot counties moving forward. Each of these was a partnership with the Division of Labor with some shared funding, but mostly an agreement between the SAG and the foundation on how to divide the labor, each playing to the strengths and to addressing some particular issues that we'll get to now on the next slide, if you would, Katie. So here is the kinds of, these are examples of funding opportunities that appeal to foundations. So startup costs, I just mentioned one for the Juvenile Defenders Association of Pennsylvania. Starting something like this appeals to foundations. It puts the defenders in play, creates an organizational structure, and makes it a player in the years going forward. Leadership development is also part of getting leadership buy-in. So I think we had largely a successful result here. An example is getting the Juvenile Court Judges Commission to buy into this. So, and the Chiefs Council, that is the Council of Chief Juvenile Probation Officers, that leadership buy-in was not only important for the signal it sent to every judge and every probation officer in every one of Pennsylvania's 67 counties, but it also shaped the way those leaders conducted their annual Juvenile Justice Conference in Pennsylvania every November. So once Models for Change came in, a significant number of the statewide conference workshops and plenary sessions were devoted to the collaboration between the SAG and Models for Change, led by the people who both were funding. And then the people who organized the conference gave us an extra half day at the hotel to stay after to work with 100 of us from around the state, or 150 of us, depending on the year, to share information about how Models for Change was going with the leaders who were being funded by both the SAG and the foundation. Foundations, many foundations at least, love products and love products that have their names on it. That's not true of all foundations, but some will only fund products and are less interested in process. Their trustees want to see the brand out there. In the case of Models for Change, the foundation was interested in products as part of a sustainability effort, but it was more interested in mixing and matching products, process, and people to get the work done. And we have many, many examples of products. If you look at the Models for Change website, there are probably 60 to 100 monographs and technical assistance documents. But an example is funding to the State Department of Public Welfare to develop curricula for its employees on different issues that are related to adolescent development. A module, for example, on drug and alcohol issues and treatment issues that is part of the training and booster training of all Youth Development Center employees in the state. Technical assistance is something that many foundations love to provide, in part because it could be a one-off and doesn't commit the foundation to ongoing funding. Foundations may be interested in supporting your joint venture for several years, but it's hard to keep it going forever. Technical assistance is a short-term way of getting a big boost and linking people to folks who might become important to their professional lives in the years going forward, even if the foundation or the SAG isn't supporting that. I mean, here, for example, the foundation and SAG were able to support Tom Brisso and Gina Vincent on expanding the use of the MAISY mental health screening tool and the youth level of service mental health assessment tool in getting it spread widely in the state by people who knew how to use those instruments to screen and assess mental health needs. The funding programs is more complicated, and I'll be getting to that in a few minutes when we get to the Evening Reporting Center. But now I'd like to turn with the next slide to advancing important values, because I think this is an understated aspect of gaining a foundation's interest going forward. I mean, on the one hand, everything that a foundation says it's funding is a statement of the foundation's values, which is how you align the SAG's interest and the foundation's interest going forward. But it's also true that for some foundations, some values are more important than others. So in Models for Change, disproportionate minority contact and its reduction was something that the foundation required of every state that it funded since it began the initiative. And of course, our good fortune, DMC itself is a value that every state advisory group not only has an opportunity to tackle, but is required to tackle because federal law requires it. So this was a very good opportunity from both perspectives to collaborate on a reform effort that is hard to succeed at, as many of you know, but on the value scale ranks very, very highly. Reframing justice issues as civil rights issues, presents this clearly to foundations that may not have DMC on its radar screen quite as clearly, and will provide opportunities for different kinds of grants. The Evening Reporting Center in Reading, Pennsylvania is an example of that is now operating in a very exciting way. It was a response to vast disproportionate detention of Latino youth in Berks County, Pennsylvania, and was part of the joint interest of the SAG and the Foundation to reduce racial and ethnic disparities. And here I think it was a little harder for us to get the Foundation interested at the outset in funding a program that was worried that the program wouldn't be sustained once the Foundation left. This is a classic dilemma that foundations have when they are developing model programs that are incubated in a way with under the bubble of the foundation support, the state advisory group support with highly motivated and highly skilled people. Things go away when foundations leave, and often even when SAG support leaves programs for which there isn't an ongoing funding opportunity. The good news for the foundation here was that Pennsylvania's financial structure in juvenile justice meant that if there was startup funding and there was success, then there would be a state-county cost sharing going forward that would ensure that the Evening Reporting Center would be maintained. And that's something that happened here in Pennsylvania and allowed the foundation to feel comfortable in investing a relatively small amount actually in the startup costs. There are other values that foundations these days are fond of and love to support. Family involvement, that is engaging parents, relatives, grandparents, significant caretakers of youth and of youth themselves in what's happening in the youth's life is something that many foundations are interested in. Family involvement in Pennsylvania began as a product of the mental health initiative that the SAG and MacArthur were funding together, but it soon became clear that this was something that cut across everything that was happening in juvenile justice. So it had an impact on DMC and on reentry and on actually broader areas of reform, so that eventually the family involvement work became a core part of what the Council of Chief Juvenile Probation Officers were doing. They took the baton from the foundation and the SAG. And of course, as I mentioned, the youth voice became important, but really became important. It was embedded in the funding of another value-driven system on the DMC work. Bob Listenby and George Mosey, a district attorney here in Philadelphia, created a curriculum with the DMC subcommittee of our state advisory group that is now being used in the police academy in Philadelphia around adolescent development, racial disparities, how kids are different, and how police should interact with youth. This curriculum and its presentation at police youth forums around the state has created a new group of youth leaders, and youth leadership is another area in which foundations have a strong interest. As I said, the interest is there if they have a feeling that sustainability is there, which takes us to the next slide. Okay, so there are, I think, three things that state advisory groups or others who are seeking foundation funding can do to demonstrate to foundations that they're serious about sustainability of model or pilot efforts. and have the foundation feel comfortable that it's investing in something that will have a long-term return on that investment. One is finding a home for whatever it is that is being funded by the foundation, or for that matter, by the SAG itself. Where is this program or policy or practice going to live when the foundation leaves? So here we had a really good example in the area of correctional education. After probation officers were successful in getting kids into school, we realized that it was hard keeping kids in school because they weren't getting credit for what they were taking while in placement, and they also weren't, if they weren't in school when they returned home, weren't getting jobs either because the career and technical education was so deficient in private residential and state residential programs. So the Chiefs Council, the probation leadership in Pennsylvania, created what became the Pennsylvania Academic Career and Technical Training Alliance, called PACT, P-A-C-T-T, which is described in the monograph on this partnership. The Chiefs Council agreed to provide a home for PACT, while PACT worked with residential providers to transform curricula inside facilities, and that included transforming the career and technical education as well to create certificate-bearing programs inside residential programs, to which there are now about 70 such certificate-bearing programs in residential care facilities in the state. And there's been a realignment of education programs with state standards and local school district curricula. But the Chiefs provided a temporary home. They managed the various grants because PACT wasn't incorporated as a private entity. It was an idea that had begun with the Chiefs Council and was supported by the foundation, by the state advisory group, and by other foundations. And that provided a bridge to the point where PACT got a permanent place during the last year with an organization that was able to manage its grants and funding on its way to being taken over by the state and absorbed by the State Department of Public Welfare, where it will have a permanent home. So providing a home for the initiative rather than just a start-up shanty in which the program resided is important. Sustainability is more than just having a home. It's also having ongoing funding for a program, and having people who will see that it gets out into the field in ways that ensure its deep-rooted success. So I've mentioned that Pennsylvania had a cost-sharing arrangement that allowed ongoing costs of services to be picked up. We also had state leadership agree to pick up budget positions that were at places like the Juvenile Court Judges Commission to make sure that the leadership that came around Models for Change would be sustained after the foundation left. The cost sharing and the expansion of enterprises was a big deal, I think, for the foundation. So that while MacArthur paid for the first evening reporting center, the state advisory group provided the startup costs for 5 new county evening reporting centers that came in through competitive bids and an RFP as part of Models for Change. So that was part of a diffusion effort, because diffusion is part of sustainability. It's getting programs to succeed or practices to succeed in more than the initial pilot counties. While MacArthur paid for the first 2 diversion pilot counties, the Pennsylvania State Advisory Group paid for the next 13 pilot counties, focusing on different kinds of diversion opportunities. Diversion of kids who were being referred from school to keep them out of the juvenile justice system. Diversion of kids with mental health problems as examples. And those diversion abilities are still in play. So The other thing about diversion that's interesting is that the State Advisory Group was the intellectual home as well as the actual home of the diversion effort in the state. The State Advisory Group created a diversion subcommittee to monitor the 13 grants to compete for funding actually within the SAG to keep diversion in play and to oversee the grant process and to make sure that these 13 and others would keep going in the time after MacArthur left. So now to the next slide, is I want to talk about the value of the partnership and then talk about how to think about approaching foundations for the work you're doing in your sites going forward. Before you go to places, it's helpful to know what the value is, what it is that you're marketing both inside and outside the state, so that you have support for seeking foundation help. You need the backing of your bosses, but the governors, the secretaries, whoever is in charge of the State Advisory Group or the government entity or the nonprofit that's going, why is there value in a State Advisory Group, for example, that gives out money in having a funding partner? And we found that it actually repositioned our State Advisory Group to have more authority in the state. Our SAG put in as much, if not more, than MacArthur did, over $10 million each over the years of Models for Change here. And money gives authority and position and power. Bringing in money made that even doubly true. It gained political support for the SAG adventure because you now had not only a whole lot of stakeholders, but you had a whole lot of counties that were supporting what the State Advisory Group was putting out into the field. That was very important. It enabled the state, through its state plan, not only to fund more, but to fund different, to take chances with different kinds of diversion programs or models for evening reporting centers or juvenile defense function and the like. And it's also ironically true, given the state of the federal government, that the foundation can pay for different kinds of things than the SAG can. Our State Advisory Group was reduced to, I think, the equivalent of a Vante coffee cup at our State Advisory Group meetings as food disappears from the federal system. MacArthur can pay for food. Most foundations can cover food, and in many instances paid for people who are in remote locations in the state to get them to places they needed to be effective partners in the juvenile justice reform effort. There are some small downsides to a collaboration. I found that and know that certainly as a lifetime grantee of scores of foundations. But you can lose some control if you're the SAG, depending on the funding partner. There's a sharing, obviously. There's more process, as anyone who has worked on initiatives knows. There may also be a difference of opinion about objectives. So we hit a snag in Pennsylvania probably 6 or 7 years ago when we realized that MacArthur and the State Advisory Group were using different outcome measures. The foundation had cross-state national measures that were more generic juvenile justice outcomes because it wanted to be able to compare states and wanted to have sort of a national index of how Models for Change was doing. And our State Advisory Group really didn't care much about that. And its interest was in measuring balanced and restorative justice outcomes that were a key component of the Pennsylvania system. And the debate over what we were measuring, what data we were going to collect, turns out to be a big deal. It is really important to agree on data collection and outcome measures in advance so that you're not 2 or 3 years later when you're going to a foundation for renewal trying to figure out what you should have been measuring all along and then discover that the foundation wanted you to measure something else. The other interesting thing here, which I think MacArthur and our state advisory group did really well, was shared credit for the initiative with each other. I mentioned one way that happened in our statewide conferences, in which the state leadership would have Lori Garducki from MacArthur come and speak, would be recognized, would be thanked. We would do that at our state advisory group meetings, which Lori would visit annually at a place in the middle of cornfields in Pennsylvania. And I think that was important to the foundation, that Lori could go back to Chicago and let her colleagues know that this was an effort that was really appreciated and for which the foundation was getting some credit along the way. And MacArthur was very, very generous in sharing credit with the state advisory group and bringing its leaders to the annual national conference that MacArthur supports in D.C. every December, making sure that the projects and the practices, the products, and the programs that the SAG and MacArthur funded were attributed to the right people. Credit matters to everyone at some level, and I think this worked out well. So it turned out to be win-win. And I think everybody with a successful collaboration comes out looking good. And the state really gained great leverage as it gained partners to stand with the state advisory group on the right side of the fulcrum, as new dollars and people paid for better and stronger levers of change. Before we sort of return to the poll and take some questions, I want to talk about identifying and courting foundations. And I don't have a separate slide for this. But it's important to spend some time here, because all foundation grant seeking is about being right about, when you're a grant seeker, about the what, the where, and the how much. Those are the basic three things: the what, the where, and the how much. I've talked about different ways to describe the what. So that a foundation that funds research in juvenile diabetes, for example, won't necessarily be interested in funding juvenile justice, even if your word search has uncovered juvenile in both. You want to make sure that what you're seeking funding for is an area that the foundation is interested in doing work in. And even that will require a lot more refinement, as I'll get to in a second. You want to make sure that the foundation makes grants in your geographic area. Lots of people go to foundations that have an interest in the what, but don't fund the what where they are. You have to make an ask that the foundation can support also with the dollars that it has available. Most foundations give relatively small grants, but those grants can be hugely beneficial and catalytic for the work that we're doing in state advisory groups and in our states. So you have to do a little bit of research on the how much. In addition to dividing the grants, as MacArthur and our PA SAG did, you may offer opportunities to do joint funding of a single product, for example, a publication. We'll fund the work on it, but the foundation can you fund the printing costs, as an example. So that there are different cost-sharing opportunities that are very appealing to a foundation that doesn't feel that it has to do it all. To answer the question of what, where, and how much, I suggest that if you haven't done this already or don't have a lot of experience doing it, that you go to the Foundation Center online, foundationcenter.org. Big cities have in-person foundation centers at the public library that are regional centers, but the online version is available at a relatively small cost. A lot of stuff's free, but for the directory, a relatively small cost to anyone. And I would suggest spending the $30 for a month of online service to look at the what, where, and the how much for the kinds of things that you'd like support in. you could get subscriptions for a variety of durations, and anybody could do it anywhere. And then it's doing a lot of mixing and matching of the words we talked about earlier, the menu of opportunity that might lead you to places that you least expect, but which are most fruitful for you. I mean, that's why looking at juvenile justice is a start, but you're not going to find a lot of foundations doing juvenile justice grant work. So you want to find foundations that are interested in children and youth, but maybe at-risk youth, maybe youth in poverty, maybe dealing at children of color and improving their life circumstances. All of these involve data searches that are easily doable with the Foundation Center's databases. And then all this stuff is organized by state, and some states also have directories that are accessible to you that will give you a county or in-state regional breakdown. Create your list of folks that have funded in your area before. If they fund in your area, they're more likely to continue funding in your area, unless they are already committed or are invitation-only places, which you might want to at least not start with, but get to in the long run. But then you look for contacts with trustees, staff, or other grantees who you know, so you can pick the brains of someone whom you know and ask at the foundation or from the trustee, the staff, or the grantee, and it varies by foundation. You don't want to go to a trustee at the Ford Foundation, for example, but you might want to go to a program officer, or you might want to find another grantee to figure out what was the route in, what's the best approach, what are they really interested in, as opposed to what their website says they're interested in. That will enable you to avoid wasting time on long shots. This is a courtship, and this is one of those areas in which you really have to ask who should be doing the courting. You can't be Cyrano de Bergerac asking somebody else to do the courtship for you. You really have to have a principal doing the courtship. In MacArthur's case, for some of the models for change states, frankly, the courtship began with governors calling the foundation president or vice president asking to be involved. That's not going to happen most of the time, but you do have high-level state officials who have access to important foundation executives in your state or region, or sometimes to national foundations who can make the outreach for you. But most of the time, it's easy enough to have a member of the SAG or the SAG chair or the juvenile justice specialist build a relationship with someone at a local or regional foundation to get a sense of whether support is possible and when it might be possible and how much might be in play. If you have time, I suggest meeting with foundation staff when you're not asking for anything. You want to get to know people, and they want to take the measure of you when there isn't an ask in play. Talk to the foundation people about themselves. They're really good people who will become partners to you in the work ahead. They'll become friends, they'll become colleagues, but they'll also become problem solvers at their best, and you have to get to know each other and build a level of trust so that you may never need to go to some of these foundations, but when you do go, again, it comes across as a somehow more legitimate request if you say, now is the time when I need help. And finally, be candid with the funder about the venture you propose. Funders like success, but they recognize that failure may come with any exciting venture. You don't have to oversell. You could be honest about the possibility of failure as well. So why don't we go to the next slides. I think we've already seen the poll results. It means 75% of folks who responded said that they partnered with foundations, and 100% of those who answered said that the partnerships were successful. And it looks like almost everybody, 90% of everybody, had at least a partnership with a foundation, a corporation, or both. So, Katie, we can take some questions in the next couple minutes if folks are able to stick around.
Okay, thank you, Bob. I actually already have one question, but if anyone else has any, you can either enter them in the questions box or press the raise your hand button and I will unmute you. So far the first question is, what role, if any, did the statewide planning agency play in all of this?
The statewide planning agency it varies in state by state, but it's you don't want to be going to a foundation for something that hasn't been endorsed by the statewide planning agency. I think it's really being part of the state plan and picking and choosing from it that will give you credibility. I don't think they need to go with you to the foundation. I think they might be able to write a letter of support at the right time, but that will vary depending on how much you're seeking, what you're seeking, and how controversial it might be. But that will vary from state to state because the state planning boards are so different in each state. Any other questions?
If anyone has any other questions, you can enter them in the questions box or press the raise your hand function. I'll just give everyone a minute or two in case they're typing.
Okay, we probably have another minute or two, Katie, so why don't we try to take one more question and then let people go. And you can go to the next slide as well, Katie, so that people have the contact information. And in addition to my email address in the middle, I urge you also to make contact with Autumn Dickman at her email address at the bottom of the page, and urge you to look up this publication, which goes into all the things we talked about in much greater depth, except the how to approach foundation. And this is online.
Okay, I have a question from Don Borenheimer. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. I've unmuted you, so go ahead. Don? Okay, if anyone's having any trouble, if I'm unmuting you and you're talking and we can't hear you, you can also just send in through the questions box, and I will just read it out for you.
Yeah, this is the hard part because I can't see those of you who are raising your hands.
Michael asked, will the slides be available? Yes, in about a half an hour after the webinar, the slides will be available. Robinson, I've unmuted you if you have a question.
That doesn't seem to be working, Katie.
Okay, so if anyone else has any questions, it sounds like sending them in through the computer is the best bet. We have just a few more minutes, so I'll let people enter them that way. Yeah, and if anyone has any other questions after the presentation, you can feel free to email me at Mercier, M-E-R-C-I-E-R, @juvejustice.org.
Yeah, and if folks write to us at Juvenile Law Center, we'll try to get back to you as quickly as we can and to be as helpful as we can. But Katie, seeing that there, do you have more there? Because we're at a minute before 3, and I know folks are going to begin signing off, and we should probably wind down.
Okay, that's all the questions that I'm showing so far. So if no one has any other questions, Bob, do you have anything to say before I wrap it up?
No, thank you, and thank you all for sticking through the.
All right, thank you so much for joining, everyone, and have a great day.